Namaste and welcome to our continuing series, Evenings with Sraddhalu. We have been going through a series of discussions based on Sri Aurobindo's chapter 22 of the Life Divine, where he covers the entire process of Re-Incarnation, the transition across lives, and particularly in the portion that we are now looking at in depth, he describes how the soul gathers across lives various aspects of personality, learning, experience, growth, in essence, weaving them together to form a rich, diverse soul personality, if we may call it such, and puts forward in the new incarnation a specific form or focus of personality relevant for the line of experience chosen for that life. As a consequence of this, we have come across very important corrections in our thought process and very deep insights in the why and the how of reincarnation and even of life itself. In the last line that we read in the text, he says, "It is not as a machinery for the persistent renewal or prolongation of an unchanging personality that rebirth exists, but as a means for the evolution of the spiritual being in nature." So obviously the purpose then is not to take up some past tendency, personality, capacity developed and continue to just work upon that. But this has implicit, always when you read an important statement like this, implicit is the contrary truth of it, or indicative truth of it, which is suggested. In the very act of you affirming a strong idea, something within says, what about the opposite of it? Does it have a place? So when he says, it's not for the persistent renewal or prolongation of the unchanging personality that rebirth exists, it reminds us that something within us wants actually to prolong, wants actually to have this personality to stay on. Is there a truth to that then? And if there is a truth, what is its place in this very opposite statement that it's not for prolongation of this unchanging personality? And we will come here to a very profound insight. And I skip a few paragraphs where he has discussed the place of memory and all that, and then he comes to this important statement. He says, the conception of the person and the personality, both capital P, if accepted, this conception of the person and personality, if accepted, must modify at the same time our current ideas about the immortality of the soul. For normally, when we insist on the soul's undying existence, what is meant is the survival after death of a definite, unchanging personality which was and will always remain the same throughout eternity. So if I am this fellow with these memories and this particular name and temperament, the idea would be I would want to extend this unendingly, because if this changes, then I died, isn't it? So our problem is the thing with which we are identifying. So he explains this now. It is the very imperfect, superficial I of the moment, evidently regarded by nature as a temporary form and not worth preservation, for which we demand this stupendous right to survival and immortality. So in the way we have been describing Sri Aurobindo's conception and description of the whole reincarnation process, he pointed out that the inner being is always the dominant thing and puts out influences onto the outer. The outer being a temporary front, blend of the inner potentialities and possibilities, from which the inner draws the essence of the experience. The outer is almost like a shell. It's almost like a superficial, frontal, temporary construction for utilization and then to be discarded. And it seems as if there's no point taking it further. We particularly also discussed last time of how there are elements which are brought forward, and occasionally when they are brought forward, there are memories which might also come with those elements. And if there is a reincarnation with some portion of the past vital mental bodies carried over, then memories come. And so we may say, but that I would want to do. I would want to keep something of those memories. And of this, Sri Aurobindo has a very interesting description here in the paragraph just before, which I have skipped, where he explains that if you were to bring forward such a memory, it would actually be a hindrance. So I read from that again. I've jumped back a couple of paragraphs. But if the constant development of being by developing cosmic experience is the meaning and the building of a new personality in a new birth, is the method, then any persistent or complete memory of the past life or lives might be a chain and a serious obstacle. It would be a force for prolonging the old temperament, character, preoccupation, and tremendous burden, hampering the free development of the new personality and its formulation of new experience. So you want something completely different. And if you are burdened with something which was the very opposite, it's not going to allow you to have this free development. There are many nuances even in this statement, and I will just touch upon them to give you an idea of how perfectly articulated Sri Aurobindo's concepts are, his statements are. So, if a constant development of being by developing cosmic experience is the meaning and building of new personality, and the meaning and building of new personality in a new birth is the method. So, in this fragment, first he is pointing out that for this new personality, what's the scope of action? You want constant development of being by developing cosmic experience. So the scope of the experience is not just your little family life. It's not just your little job. It's not just your country and its richness, whatever traditions. It's not even just our planet Earth. The scope is cosmic experience. And we tend to forget this because we are so obsessed with the littleness of ourselves and our lives and even our conception of life itself. From childhood, you're being hammered through your education that we are alone in the universe. There's no other life anywhere else. Oh, by the way, we just discovered another planet. It might have life. No, it won't. Very likely it doesn't. And you've been hammered this. When the reality is the very opposite. There is life everywhere, teeming everywhere, no exception. And even intelligent life. Just going by the numbers, trillion stars in just our little galaxy and so many planets, inevitably you will have living beings. The scope is meant to be cosmic. It's not just that you can reincarnate across planets. It's not even that. It is that your experience of the world is meant to be in the growth and evolution of your eventual journey to actually explore the universe in its entirety. Now, we are still too small to be able to conceive of what that might be like. But we do get glimpses occasionally from certain descriptions that we have found. And I remember one particular which I found in Mark Obern's recollection of his prior lifetime in a different planet. And he describes there, as a scientist that he was in that incarnation, he describes how sometimes being in his house, at the end of the day, what do you do for entertainment? One of the things he would do is take a little tablet-like device, which was an amplifier of the psychic abilities, and use that to tune in and project consciousness to different parts, to different planets in the universe in order to learn about new things. Now, it's a technological amplification of what is essentially a psychological or psychospiritual potential within us. But this is to give you an idea of what is really possible when the consciousness sufficiently opens to its cosmic reality and cosmic potential, that you can actually reach out and experience things which are way out without limit. So this is just a passing hint in passing, Sri Aurobindo uses this phrase, developing cosmic experience. And you want constant development of being. So the essential being, the psychic being within, wants to have constant development. Again, the implication of this is enormous. And it is that this development does not ever stop. It would go on into eternity. So already in this phrase you have the infinity of the universe and the eternity of time, which is the scope that is being taken into consideration for this idea of soul's growth. And then, of course, new personality is born. Then he says, then any persistent or complete memory of past life or lives might be a chain and a serious obstacle. It would be a force for prolonging the old temperament. Now, why is he saying might be a chain and then would be a force for prolonging? Again, I'm just sharing this as a nuance of Sri Aurobindo's precision of ideas. And it really has, you have to make your mind able to appreciate. You have to be able to fine tune your capacities of intelligence and conception, comprehension, to really focus on fine details to fully appreciate how rich Sri Aurobindo's articulation and his mind would be. So, why might be a chain? And then, but it would be a force for prolonging the old temperament. So the idea is this. Yes, any memory would be a force for prolonging the old temperament, character, tremendous burden, etc. We read that. It would be, no doubt, always. But might be a chain and serious obstacle in most cases. But there might be some cases where it might not. And this is one of those things which is so difficult to understand because our life experience is still too narrow. And again, I'm going to draw upon the experience of Mark O'Byrne. For those of you who have read his books or heard some of his talks, or recently we put out some discussions that we had together on the topic of peace, and then on parasites, vital beings which suck energy, and so on. In those discussions, you'll find many interesting things which he draws from his past life memories. And here's the interesting part. I recently had a joint program with him where we were discussing reincarnation and past life memories. And one of the things which he had to do, he said, was consciously go back and draw upon the past memories. And in his first book, he actually writes how when such a memory came back strongly, it was spontaneous the first time, when it came back strongly of a death in Greece in a prior life nearly 2000 years ago, the pain and the anguish and all the suffering associated with that rushed in. And it took him a couple of years to be able to manage that and free himself from the consequences. So what Sri Aurobindo says about the force for prolonging the old temperament and the burden hampering free development, that's obvious. And yet he says, I need to go back and recall memories and bring them forward. Why? And I'm giving this as an example because he's quite a bit of an exceptional person, not quite in the normal domain of our typical human evolutionary lines. So what you find there, two things which are outstanding. First, that he has memories of a prior life in that planet, in that other place that he calls the SS3 solar system, which had 3 suns, where the biology framework itself was capable of a much higher grade of intelligence, psycho-spiritual capacities, psychic powers, etc. And incarnating into the human biology was like a dulling, numbing, reducing effect. So when he is able to go back to the memories of that time, it's as if he is able to draw upon a superior phase of his life journey across lives, let's say, and also draw upon some useful knowledge from there. So here's an exception where actually drawing upon past life memories would be of benefit. And the second thing, which is very specific to him, is that it is almost as if a part of his mission in this incarnation to place before those who are interested certain aspects of his life experience in order to assist others to also awaken to this reality. And one of the ways he does that is by drawing upon the continuity of past life memories and even helping others to realize, to wake up to the reality that you have past lives and the memories, and something can be drawn out which would remind you of the continuity, but more importantly, awaken you to the fact that this is not just one life. And in so doing, touch a part of you, even in memory, which would be as if the immortality that you are, even by reflection. So it becomes as if almost a part of his purpose. And there you get a hint of where it might be useful for all of us to have that kind of an access to past life memories, to help, because it could remind you or put you back in touch with the part of you that has the continuity, or still deeper, the part of you that owns and is the immortality of the person behind the personality. And in such a case, you will realize that it's not so much the details of past lives which are important, but the sense of the immortality and the memory of that which is important for this purpose. I'm deliberately dwelling on this a little bit because we are going to come to this idea again in a different way for our primary topic today. But you see again a nuance in Sri Aurobindo's writings where he says, might be a chain and serious obstacle for most people. It need not be for all, or not in all circumstances. But it would be a force for prolonging the old temperament. See, there's no exception. So then he gives an example. He says, a clear and detailed memory of past loves, hatreds, rancors, attachments, connections would be equally a stupendous inconvenience. For it would bind the reborn being to a useless repetition or a compulsory continuation of his surface past, and stand heavily in the way of his bringing out new possibilities from the depths of the spirit. Now, it's obvious what he's saying, that if you're so overwhelmed by the past memories, and it's a whole lifetime, and you're just beginning a new life, and the burden of the whole past entire lifetime overwhelms you, where would you have the freedom for the new life? Except in rare cases, where you have sufficiently developed and evolved that despite those memories being there, you can set them aside and assert a greater freedom. When would that be? When you are living not by the habit of your surface personality, but by the truth of your inner being as the primary driver. In such a case, one could actually assert one's freedom despite the burden of the past memories being still there. Think about this. So all of this I'm actually showing you the exceptions to what Sri Aurobindo is describing, because it's going to prepare us to understand something which will be most important for our topic. How do we actually continue this memory, and what is it that we will be able to continue? So I continue with the text. If indeed a mental learning of things were the heart of the matter, if that were the process of our development, memory would have a great importance. But what happens is the growth of the soul's personality and the growth of the nature by an assimilation into our substance of being, a creative and effective absorption of the essential results of past energies. So here again, the point is made. What is it that we really learn and carry over into the next? It's not mental memories. If that was the case, then of course memory would be essential. What is carried over is not mental memories, but is the growth of soul personality and growth of the nature. So soul personality is that thing where rich elements of the past have been brought forward, organized, etc. That's your soul personality. And soul nature in the way it's able to express and the capacities it has developed and put forward, etc. So these are the things, and the growth of the nature by an assimilation. So into the nature, things are being assimilated. The assimilation is important because remember, assimilation is not reproduction, not learning by heart an entire book, but absorbing what is essentially required for you. And where is this assimilation? Into the substance of our being, the thing which is your true existent substance, which is in the psychic being. Into that there's an assimilation being taking place. A creative and effective absorption of the essential results of past energies. Again, if you pause on each word, you're absorbing the essential results of past energies. But how? Creative and effective absorption. It's not as if you just take an imprint and leave it at that. There's a creative integration that is taking place. And that has for a purpose. It has to be effective for future action, for future experience. It is that which becomes the framework of what is useful and what is not. Let's say you played, I'm going to take a very ordinary example. You played a game of tennis. You play tennis or any other game. If you record every single stroke, every single muscular movement required to make that stroke of every single game, or every moment, every second of the experience, you record everything and say, this is so precious. And this I'm going to use for the next game. Except the next game, the partner is different, the nature of the play is different. If you try to replicate any of these, it is entirely useless. What do? Having played the game, it's as if within you some kind of an integration takes place where the details of each stroke are lost, and rather the overall turn of the strokes and their results are woven into each other to form a sense of what it's like to be in relation with the ball and the stroke. This integrated portion, in a kind of an essential summary, now taken into the next game with a completely different circumstance, is actually useful. The specific repetitions are not useful. This essential content is useful, but it has been gathered in such a way as to have utility, but also woven into the next circumstance with a creative shift. As I describe this, those of you who have a technical background would recognize this is what artificial intelligence is being as if trained to do. You look at masses of data, text typically is what we are looking at today, but anything could be taken. And the AI is not supposed to replicate and learn by heart the whole thing. It's supposed to as if summarize and find essential patterns and trends and tendencies and then apply them in a creative way to the new circumstance. Then you have useful AI, otherwise it's not, isn't it? It's a very similar process that's taking place. And you see the subtlety of the words Sri Aurobindo uses and the information that it gives you. A creative and effective absorption of the essential results of past experience energies in the substance of your being. In this process, conscious memory is of no importance. Remembering all the details of each stroke that you played when you played tennis, it's pointless. This essence is what matters, isn't it? As the tree grows by a subconscious or inconscient assimilation of action of sun and rain and wind and absorption of earth elements, so the being grows by subliminal or intraconscient assimilation and absorption of its results of past becoming and an output of potentialities of future becoming. The analogy, the example he gives is amazing. How does the tree grow? It's taking, absorbing earth elements, sun, rain, etc. How it does, we don't know, subconscious, inconscient assimilation, whatever. But when it gathers, the tree that comes out is completely new. The seed genetically may be identical, but when each seed grows, it's completely new as a tree. And yet the essence is the same. The thing is gathered. But in the tree, do you see the sun? Do you see the rain? Do you see the wind? Do you see those earth elements? Nothing is seen. The tree is a thing in itself. And yet it needed all that to become tree. But what is expressed now, what is gathered, is completely fundamentally different. So is the experience that we gather from the lives. So it's not as if that particular detail of the way I played the tennis strokes in my prior life is now going to be useful. No. The essence of that relationship that I have in the play, in the game, and the way it shaped my personality, the way it formed my individuality, the way it helped me to develop and master my emotions and channel my energies, all those things which have nothing to do with the ball or the racket or the person who played in front of me or even the court size. None of those things matter. It is these things which matter. And here, where do you see the relationship with what was learned? The details are not important. And that's why he says, absorption of its results of past becomings and an output of potentialities of future becomings. So there are 2 points. This absorption is there, but it is turned towards how this can be applied to future potentialities. It's not as if I just want to gather the past and I'm building this baggage of experiences, even if it's assimilated baggage. The goal is what is gathered is for use for future potentialities. And if it is not useful for that, those things are discarded. But what is gathered for future potentialities is so valuable. And the future potentiality may, for example, not have tennis. We've all been perhaps in some past 10,000 years ago incarnation where we played games equivalent to basketball or football or others. Many such games have happened. The rules in modern times, the size of the court and the balls are totally different. It's not that which is going to be replicated. It's the way you play, the way you relate to challenges. Those are the things which will come forward in the new game. So the potentiality of future becoming, that's what you gather in the essence. So the law that deprives us of the memory of past lives is a law of the cosmic wisdom and serves, not disserves, its evolutionary purpose. So this was as regards the memory, and he makes a comment that the loss of memory is often taken to be a disproof of rebirth, but he explains even where there are memories which come, they fade into the background or as you grow older. And there are sometimes very rich details which come, and all these things he discusses in the next paragraph. But he explains the obliteration of the surface mental memory is all the more certain and quite inevitable if there is a new personality of the same being and a new instrumentation which takes place of the old. So the moment you have taken new substance for mind, new substance for life, new body, well, you can't have the old things being carried over because it's new substance. The new brain cannot be expected to carry in itself the images held by the old brain, and so on. So, but where is the memory held? He says it is held in the subliminal layers. Whatever is retained is in the subliminal layers, and in the subliminal ranges, which are much more free, much more large, and they are actually infinite in potential, you don't have the disabilities of the surface, he says. The surface memory has limitations. So the surface mind is cut off from the subliminal memory, which alone might retain some clear recollection or distinct impression of past lives. This separation is necessary because the new personality has to be built up on the surface without conscious reference to what is within. So when this new personality is being built up, there's no conscious reference to what is inside, and so the separation is going to be there, and it's necessary even for this purpose. And the surface personality is formed by actions of within us, but that action is not conscious. It seems to itself to be self-formed or ready-made or formed by some ill-understood action of universal nature. I'm reading again. So the way the outer thing is formed, we don't know. But it's formed under guidance of the inner, always. And like everything else, he says, it's always the inner which forms. And because it's formed with this separation where the outer does not know much of the inner, memories are lost. And yet, he says, fragmentary recollections of past births do sometimes remain. And even sometimes of astonishing details. Okay. Then the critical part for us is this. Finally, at a certain stage of development of the being, when the inner begins to predominate over the outer and come to the front, past life memory does sometimes begin to emerge as if from some submerged layer. So as long as this gap was there between the outer and the inner, well, obviously you didn't have the memories. When this inner comes forward strongly, it brings with it what it carries. So sometimes emerge, but it doesn't always have to be. You can choose to not hold that. And as if from some submerged layer. It's a layer of awareness, but it has as if pushed back and been covered up by other layers. But more readily in the shape of a perception of the stuff and power of past personalities that are effective in the composition of the being in the present life than in any precise and accurate detail of events and circumstances. So when what comes forward is not about details of circumstances, it's about the perception of the powers, capacities, and the substance of that past personality. It is that which comes forward first. Although these two can occur in parts. So accurate details of events and circumstances, he said, these two can recur in parts or be recovered by the concentration from subliminal vision or some secret memory or from our inner conscious substance. Now here he is telling you the methods by which you can actually go within and draw out those memories if you wanted them. So sometimes they may come spontaneously or spontaneously be held back. But suppose you decide to draw upon them. So what is the method? What are the methods? It can be recovered by concentration from the subliminal vision. So you have a surface vision turned outward. That's the nature of the outer consciousness. It's always turned outward. You close your eyes, turn your consciousness inward. You shift the poise of consciousness deep enough until literally the outer fades out and you don't even remember that there is an outer. And at that point we will say we are in the subliminal domain. And the turn of awareness there, which looks, feels, sees, senses what is inside, that's what would be called subliminal vision. So, concentration from the subliminal vision. So the method would be what? Disengage from the surface, turn your consciousness within, go deep, deep, deep enough that the outer now fades out totally. Not too difficult, it's a basic practice of concentration. If you persist, you'll get this very quickly. Having got to that now, you choose to concentrate to learn or draw out something specific. For example, you might find within you, oh, here's an artistic tendency which I know I've always had from childhood, and it was always there, although I never much developed it. What is this feeling? Where is it coming from? And in the subliminal, you concentrate. And there's a point where you can feel now the substance of that artistic tendency. Into that substance come tendencies specific. Oh, in the way this artistic tendency works, I have as if a very strong turn towards refinement, or a very strong turn towards this particular type, or this particular form, or this particular aspiration. And all this you now begin to draw out from the substance. And these are the powers which are actively driving your artistic turn on the surface. And then you go still deeper, and then comes a certain memory. Oh, this was developed in this particular time. I remember now, I have a brief glimpse of being in such and such a space, working under such and such a teacher for this quality which was being developed. So typically the first memory that would come in such a case would be that which is retained by the soul and which the soul feels. Those were moments where the higher turn of the soul came forward. And so those memories are first drawn. One could still go deeper and even draw much more. But typically what comes forward is the things which were of value to the soul's aspiration. So this would be first process. And we'll reread that as concentration from the subliminal vision. Okay. Second, from some secret memory. It's already there, it pops up. Where was it? It was hidden. What happened? How did it pop up? Well, I wanted to know and then somehow it came, I don't know how. It was a memory held. Why was that memory held? Because somewhere within, in that incarnation, a certain turn of consciousness was very strong, or a certain event was strongly impressed for the soul's evolution, which was as if an aha moment where the soul went, oh, something rich absorbed, and it holds that. Somehow it amplifies in the soul's memory as something vivid. And it was there, hidden, it pops out. Nothing particular you might have done. Secret memories could be drawn simply by turning your attention and waiting, or wanting and holding an aspiration. Or from our inner conscious substance. So again, it's similar to what we discussed earlier. You go within deep enough. In the substance of your consciousness are the imprints of whatever was work done in that substance or in that part of your consciousness. Going into that substance, one can literally draw out anything which is the substantiality of what was the gathered experience of those lives held there. And since it's a blend of many different things, you might find many different life experiences blending in a particular part of substance of your consciousness. So these are, you can see in the way he describes all the variations by which one would be able to go within. I'm going to take a digression briefly though, because a lot of what you see popularly is methods of past life recovery is through hypnosis. And people say, oh, I will put you through hypnosis and some memory will come up. I've seen, known, you can see a lot of this on the internet. They'll read out a text. They call it a hypnosis script. The fellow who reads it out is going blah, 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 blah. You are allowing those words to, let's say, he will say, take to so many steps, go down into a well, go in a beautiful scene, and now you open a door. Whatever the form of visual imagery. What's happening in such a case? The fellow who's reading a script, in most cases, is useless. There are very few hypnotists who have actually the ability to nudge you to a deeper poise. And still fewer hypnotists who could actually follow you and enter deep within and be with you in the hypnotic experience. Most cannot do that, or don't even know that it's possible the way they're taught. It would be because of a yogic dimension that one would have that. Irrespective. The point though is you have, as the hypnotized person, been led into a deep state in the subliminal domain. The deeper the subliminal penetration, the more likely that you might tap into something. The problem though is, and this is the problem of hypnosis, in that subliminal state you're open to all impressions. Not just impression that comes from the inner substance of your being, but also impressions which come from outside. Or impressions from your surface substance of being. You're just open to impressions without discrimination. Because after all, who is discriminating? Who has the ability? Neither the hypnotist nor the person being hypnotized. In rare cases where the hypnotized person has a certain discrimination and inner ability, which would be exceptional from the yoga point of view, that they've worked on it, then he might actually tap into a real memory. Otherwise, he could pick up anything. So, I give this example. Hypnotized, and something is being said, okay, you go and pick this, go within your past life memory. A third person sitting there can make a strong formation, and the hypnotized person will pick up that formation as his own memory. Or somebody has passed on and a piece of their consciousness detached, hanging around, or having attached to this person, infused into him, might be picked up and say, that's my memory. It's not. It's somebody else's memory that got infused into you. Or it could be picked up from a wandering thought at that moment, or it could be picked up from the hypnotist's subconscious or his expectations. Perhaps I've mentioned here before that there was a study done where hypnotists were told specific things. Oh, such and such patient had particular trauma or particular experience in childhood or some memory of being abducted by UFOs. They made up any story. And the hypnotist was told to draw out that memory. And in every case, the hypnotist was able to draw out a memory of whatever that made up story was. Showing you that the expectation and the bias of the hypnotist is going to shape the memory of the hypnotized. So hypnosis is fundamentally an unreliable method to draw out soul memories because it does not tap into soul and cannot discriminate between soul and other subliminal influences from any direction, from any source. Yet if the hypnotist or the hypnotized has a deeper soul, let's say discrimination, one can still use methods approaching those types, but they're fundamentally unreliable. So, but still coming to, while he describes you can do all this, the point he makes, but this detailed memory is of minor importance to nature in her normal work, and she makes small or no provision for it. If it was important, nature would have built within you the capacity to have this kind of detailed information. So he explains it is the shaping of the future evolution of the being with which she is concerned. So nature's focus is the future. The past is put back, kept behind the veil, and used only as an occult source of materials for the present and the future. Secret source, things pop out, you don't know when, you don't know how, you don't know by what means, you don't know what it is even, things pop out and are there with you when you need them. That's about all that typically happens. Except when the inner being comes forward strongly, then with it a lot of this would tend to come. With this now, very important part is the text we began with, the conception of person and personality, and this very imperfect, superficial I is what we want to prolong, when in reality, it is the inner person that is the focus. So, it is the very imperfect, superficial I of the moment, evidently regarded by nature as a temporary form and not worth preservation, for which we demand this stupendous right to survival and immortality. And then Sri Aurobindo's comment, but the demand is extravagant and cannot be conceded. The I of the moment can only merit survival if it consents to change, to be no longer itself, but something else, greater, better, more luminous in knowledge, more molded in the image of the eternal inner beauty, more and more progressive towards the divinity of the secret spirit. So, for nature, this I and its demand to survive is absolutely extravagant, cannot be conceded. But it can merit survival under certain circumstances. It can merit. It doesn't mean it will always be given, but it will at least merit. Okay, what would be those things? And here we get the hint of what is required for continuity across lives. First, the I of the moment can only merit survival if it consents to change. Since remember, the whole point was the change into a new personality so that you could have a new experience. And if this fellow is willing to say, okay, I'm going to let go of all my current temperament, tendencies, limitations, and literally shape myself to do something totally different that I completely dislike in my current nature. Are you willing to do that? Consents to change, to be no longer itself but something else. Now comes a bigger idea still. What is this something else? It's okay, I was an engineer, now I want to become an artist. Am I willing to do that? Nah, there's a huge resistance of the engineer's framework. I am engineer. What is this artistic? Unstructured, nebulous, vague, sentimental, unformed, no precision. You are wandering with the whims and fancies of the impulse of the moment. I can't do that. I'm an engineer. I'm rock hard, solid, realistic, materially fixed. You see how the contradiction can be. But something more. To be no longer itself, but something else. But Sri Aurobindo is pointing to something much more. Not just switching between this mode to that, though that is necessary. Something else greater, better, more luminous in knowledge. So in consciousness you will become greater and better. I mean, obviously in quality of consciousness you have grown larger, more luminous in knowledge. That means your capacity and depth of perception and the quality of knowledge which you receive also now it grows. More molded in the image of the eternal inner beauty. Look at the typical human being. Crude, coarse, very little of any deeper spiritual or psychic vibration or harmony. But if you can become more and more in the image of that which is your true psychic being, then perhaps you begin to merit. So, molded in the image of the eternal inner beauty, and the psychic being he is describing in this particular characteristic. First of all, it is eternal. So its beauty is eternal. And its beauty is not a superficial form beauty, but an inner essential qualitative beauty. As an experience, when you have a glimpse of that, or when you feel that as a vibration behind the appearance of forms, that comes as a vibration, as a quality. If you have a little bit of that touch in experience, you will recognize that in others. That's about it. But as a quality of vibration. What happens if that vibration now actually is molding the outer shape of your thoughts, of your emotions, even of your actions, and then eventually even of your form of body? What would that mean? What would that be like? We do get glimpses of this if you have met people who have something of this in some part. You do get that if, for example, you have met some pretty dramatic examples in the mother's personality, in Sri Aurobindo's personality, and occasionally in a few. We sometimes get a glimpse of this in very little children, where the psychic influence is strong and the outer influences have not damaged the spontaneous and joyous blooming, flowering of personality, especially if they have not grown up in artificial and contrary circumstances. We do get glimpses of that. But you see the way he describes the psychic influence and what is needed of that influence to infuse into the outer, molded in the image of the eternal inner beauty. And so this is of course the form of the psychic influence, but generally now in the spiritual aspect of it, as distinct from the psychic, more and more progressive towards the divinity of the secret spirit, capital S. So the psychic influence strong, and then the spiritual potential and the divinity of the secret spirit progressive towards that. That means that is not so much about form. It's about the potential for progress in all directions, in all possibilities, infinite potential. And are you willing to be able to progress towards that? It is that secret spirit or divinity of self in us which is imperishable, because it is unborn and eternal. The psychic entity within, its representative, the spiritual individual in us, is the person that we are. So he's making a distinction between the self, which is the spiritual aspect of us, and then the psychic aspect of us. The self is very simply unborn, eternal, therefore imperishable, unchanging, but holding all potential. It's not a monotone, unchanging, flat. It is infinite potential. And its representative, a part of it as if put out into space-time limitation of experience, is this, the psychic entity within us. It represents that. And this is the spiritual individual in us, the person, capital P, that we are. But the I of this moment, the I of this life, is only a formation, a temporary personality of this inner person. So this is the portion we are identified with on the surface, this I of the moment, I of this life. It's a formation. When a consciousness, which is free of form, projects out and identifies with or forms around itself something, that's what we call formation. A temporary personality of this inner person, capital P. It is one step of the many steps of our evolutionary change. Think about it in this way. The real person inside, the psychic person, is taking steps with each life. And each life personality is a step in this journey. The many steps of our evolutionary change. As it takes steps, there is an evolutionary change. And it, the surface person, serves its true purpose only when we pass beyond it to a farther step. So what is the use of this personality that you have? It serves its true purpose when you are able to go to the next from it. Its point is to serve you to go to the next. And the fact that you go to the next, you discard. Obviously, it's no more relevant. See how trivial this whole surface outer personality is seen when you look at this big picture of the soul's journey. So if its true purpose only when we pass beyond it to a farther step. And what is that? Leading nearer to a higher degree of consciousness and being. So you are like a stepping stone assisting this growth of the true person into a higher degree of consciousness and being. So who is the real you? Not this frontal I, but the true person that is you. Except that you are not identified there, you are identified with this. An analogy would be now appropriate. When you are writing, as a child, trying to get your handwriting to be neat, or you're learning to write a letter. Teacher drew it on the board, I look at that shape and I try to move my pencil. If you remember what it was like in kindergarten, you didn't know how to hold the pencil sometimes, and the teacher made you hold in a peculiar way. It didn't feel right to you. Maybe you found it easier to hold it like this, isn't it? The pencil like this and write. But the teacher said, no, you have to write like this. And it took you time to try to fit into that groove. But as you did this, where was your attention when you were writing the letter? You're writing a letter or A, and your whole attention is on the finger and the hand controlling it. At that moment, you are hand holding pencil. You are nothing else. If at that moment there's a shock, you're thrown back from that false identification. You say, what's happening? You identify with something else. That something else is still a very superficial thing. It's I, this person, child in this teacher's school setting. If at that point there's a still stronger shock, something inner wakes up. Why am I here? Who am I truly? And maybe something else is more deeply felt. And this is the reason why very often it happens for people that a very powerful shock in life often awakens them to their own deeper, inner, higher spiritual dimension, and something of that higher comes forward sometimes to assist. Because we are not as hypnotized, the shock of that event has as if broken the hypnosis. So, It is the inner person that survives death, even as it pre-exists before birth. It was already there before it took birth. After death, it's what survives. Death of what? Just the body. For this constant survival is a rendering of the eternity of our timeless spirit into the terms of time. Again, it's one of those sentences which throws you out of your conventional form of thinking and opens you to a deep spiritual truth which is so difficult to articulate in material terms. And yet it defines material terms. This soul survives death, pre-exists before birth. It's eternal. This constant survival of the soul itself is a rendering of the eternity of our timeless spirit into the terms of time. We are self, timeless, infinite potential, rendering itself in terms of time as this psychic being and personality growing and developing. From outside time, you are representing what is outside time in the unfolding of time and space. But you must maintain and protect and retain something of the timeless spirit into the time space. That is the meaning, the sense of the psychic being unfolding, working out, growing through lives. It's a rendering of the eternity of our timeless spirit into the terms of time. What can time hold of that? In what way can it hold? Typically by rhythms, typically by forms which reflect or which represent, which imitate or which give as if form to, as a vehicle for something which is beyond form. That's why rendering and the constant survival of the soul here in the journey, in time, in limitation, is a rendering of that deep truth here. If you dwell on this idea and really go deep into identifying with it, you get into an experience which is quite amazing. You experience what it is like to be free of in the timeless freedom of self, and from the self's perspective, what it's like to enter and experience the unfolding in time as a soul in evolution. And you're still self, rendered in terms of time, in terms of a material, in terms of a substance, in terms of a domain which is so fundamentally different, and yet it is still holding the self and the way it works. This glimpse when you have, you will understand why so many traditions found it difficult to accept the reality of the soul. For example, in Buddhism, you don't have a soul, you don't have God. Why? And when you approach the soul, because there is always the soul, when you approach that, what do they describe it? As the emptiness at the source of all the movement. They may use different words, that's not the point. In the whirl of the whirlpool, the point which is at the center, which never moves, which is not the whirlpool. And yet, without that, there would be no whirlpool. You see, it's an attempt to transcribe this truth, but reduced to mind's ability to comprehend. Or in more other Vedantic traditions, again, you don't have this idea of a soul in evolution because there is only self. And yet, there is the experience of soul. Oh, but it is self, now reduced or transcribed in the viewer's experience to what can be learnt and experienced within time. But if you go deep enough into self, then this part which is in time, the soul's representation, so to say, fades out. And all illusion, all world is an illusion along with this part and is lost. But if you catch this part while it is still in time, it becomes your experience of self, but in your personal, intimate experience. And you realize then that you are immortal as psychic being. But it's your gateway to self, and the focus being exclusively on self, you eventually discard the psychic experience. So it's the reason why the psychic experience, although being present in all the spiritual traditions, has been neglected or forgotten because of this exclusive focus to go through it to the self or to bypass it to the thing of which it is a transcription, and so it is discarded as a transcription along with the rest of time and space in the illusory approach. So this is a very profound insight. I've dwelt on it in some sense because it will give you a glimpse of the relationship between this in an experiential way. I will share here a very personal, intimate experience. It had happened a long time ago. I've mentioned it perhaps in passing many times, but in this context it's worth resharing it. When I had gone through a certain crisis in my life and I had come to the recognition that all this was the result of not being aware of the self, of the psychic being within me. And it's, if you remember Tara Johor's correspondence with the mother in her book, she writes, when she was going through a huge painful passage, mother said, there's only one solution for you. You must find your psychic being. So every day we will sit together and meditate. This was in 1970-71, if I remember right. And she said, every day we will sit and meditate together to find your psychic being. And mother would sit with this young girl at that time and concentrate to help her to find the psychic being as the only solution for the problem she was going through. So I had already, because of prior reading and background of things of Sri Aurobindo and mother and the things I had heard growing in the ashram, I knew that for my crisis that was the only thing. And it was what would bring back the sense of meaning, direction, purpose, etc. And I resolved to do it. So mother said it's possible, so I'm going to do it. But you must be in exclusive focus. So I said, whatever happens. And I really dedicated myself intensely to that. And literally day and night, every chance it was there at the back of my mind, again and again reminding, concentrating, to feel that that's the only thing which matters, nothing else matters. And I persisted in this for about a month. I remember at that time I was traveling. I was at one point in Germany, and the person had driven the car, and we stopped. And I again remembered, and I again connected. And the person, he saw me doing something, and he said, yeah, we have to thank the mother for we didn't have any accident. And it was not at all my purpose. I was in this. So I'd gone for about 1 month in this very intense focus. And at the end of that, I had an occasion to be in a kind of a concentrated meditation state in a retreat. And entering into this full focus, full intensity, with the prior preparation of a month, 1, 2, 3, I think the third day, I hit an experience. Going deep within, and there was the sudden emergence of this extraordinary, beautiful thing. Something so beautiful as to be impossible, literally. And the way it articulated in my consciousness at that point, if I had to describe what was seen, if truth could become substance, this is the only way to describe it. It was literally truth, which is for us such an abstract thing. We have an idea, conception even. It's not even an idea, it's a pure abstract conception. If truth could become substance, and this substance is truth, it lives by itself, it needs nothing else, it is dependent on nothing. And it is so beautiful. It is soft, moist, rich, full, glowing substance of truth, light, right? Love, whatever. The words failed. But it was real substance. It is the only thing real that I've ever experienced in life. And real meaning, it is immortal. It exists by itself, depends on nothing else. In the world, everything is relative. Everything is interdependent. This was in itself. And it was such an extraordinary experience. I don't go into the details of the experience, but this was the way it articulated in the consciousness. If truth could become substance. You get an idea of this when you read. This will help you to understand these lines. For this constant survival is a rendering of the eternity of our timeless spirit into the terms of time. And this survival is this. That is eternal. Then transcribed into domain of time, it becomes constant survival. But for the substance itself is that emerging and taking form in time. And it was such a beautiful experience. It completely overturned my sense of life, purpose, meaning. After that, the only question was, what do I do? This person is useless, meaningless. Only that matters. What do you do? What do I do with it, having had this glimpse? Of course, it was only a first glimpse. It led to many changes over the next few months, where it reassessed all values. It put everything into context. If this, once having touched or experienced this, everything changes its values. And the access to it was not there. To regain that access to it took much longer afterwards. But the first glimpse which was given was like a shock to the whole system, because it is so different from anything you can conceive of. And you understand when the mother answers, somebody asks, how do I know if I found my psychic being? She says, if you ask the question, then you have not. When you have found it, the experience is such a overturning. In French, bouleversement was the word that comes. It turns everything upside down, literally. Your values, everything is changed. It's not realization. It's a first contact, a first experience of the substance, which is the psychic being. It's literally substance. It's not just something airy. It's substance. And then we understand, we get a glimpse there also of what it's like when Mother says that supramental body transformed will be literally the materialization of the psychic being. The substantiality of it now acquiring the materiality. And what would that be like? Oh, such a beautiful, extraordinarily beautiful divinity in substance, truth in substance. And if you try to even conceive of that, the world is too crude, too coarse to be able to contain, to hold this. And we can understand why it takes a while. There's so much which is contrary to it, that it takes a while for this to push its way and prepare the ground in which it could eventually emerge and to take its rightful place, because even the ground doesn't exist. So I have dwelt in this a little bit, but you will understand how this self and the timeless spirit is rendering itself within the domains of time, not just in its persistence, but even in its substantiality and all other potential. And it is this which is your psychic being that is growing and evolving. And it is this which is the true person that is you. And the I on the surface is just steps, so to say, for its journey, for its evolutionary growth. Now, as a consequence of this, we come back to this question of survival. And that question which Sri Aurobindo said, we don't deserve, if we don't have the legitimacy even to be demanding you as the surface I to survive. So, what our normal demand of survival asks for is a similar survival as the survival of the psychic being is a similar survival for our mind, our life, and even our body. We're asking for this. And is there a truth to it? Or is there a condition in which that could still be possible? And that's the thing he comes to. The dogma of the resurrection of the body attests to this last demand. Even as it has been the root of the age-long effort of man to discover the elixir of immortality, or any means magical, alchemic, or scientific, to conquer physically the death of the body. So just this idea, which you see in certain traditions, religions, that, oh, the body which had died now gets resurrected. So in Christianity, Christ's body gets resurrected, but you have other similar stories, even in other traditions, not given the same place as given in Christianity, but the idea that, oh, someone died and then came back to life, or you will find a lot of this in there's a name given, Babaji, who lives in a body which is immortal. It's not a physical body, it's a subtle physical. In the subtle physical, you don't have death. But the idea that, oh, such and such a person is now immortal. And this is persistent. And the idea has been the root of this age-long effort to find the elixir of immortality. You'll have stories about this in every tradition. You'll have alchemical, technological, technical, magical means by which the body is somehow prolonged. There's one very interesting story which I had heard while I was in Orissa, where one of the very great tantrics of a few hundred years ago was so powerful that he could actually capture the moon, and on a full moon night he made the moon reflected in the water and it was not there in the sky. It was as if caught in the water. There was some magical power. He was able to cover the moon and only the reflection seen. Various things. And apparently at some point he has developed or discovered the power to render the body immortal. And so his son tells him, if you do this, then you're going against God's will and I'm going to kill you. So the man says, all right, you do your duty and I will do mine. So he has this being which is like a servant assistant to him. And he tells the being what to do and tells the son, okay, go ahead, chop my head off. So the son chops his head and the being then puts his head back on. He is using the elixir which he has discovered. His body becomes immortal and then he tells the son, now I'm dead to the world, so I'm leaving. Tells his assistant, okay, let's go, and poof, he vanishes. Now, that's a story. Doesn't matter how true it is. The idea behind it, though, is this. That somehow, some mechanism, you should be able to make your body immortal. You see this in modern efforts to prolong, by genetic intervention, the biology of the body, especially in the work of David Sinclair, professor at Harvard University, who has actually been taking cells of the body, reversing their age regressing to any point, then again accelerating aging and regressing to any point using certain very simple interventions, technical interventions, which are called Yamanaka factors. If you apply those factors, it's a kind of a genetic intervention, the cells regress. If you apply all four, the cells become cancerous. You apply two of them, the cells can regress to any youthful state. And with that, literally portions of the body are regenerated or made youthful and so on. Now all this is, and Sri Aurobindo mentions this, alchemic or scientific or magical methods to conquer physically the death of the body. If the basis of that is some deep instinct within us says, hey, this has to be possible. Behind that is the truth of the glimpse of the supramental being, which in principle, because its substance is of a divine substance, or its substance is acquired divinity, would in principle be capable of freedom from death and decay. Doesn't mean he has to stay immortal. Sri Aurobindo says he can still discard the body if he chooses, but the body does not undergo decay and death by compulsion. That's the only difference. But now Sri Aurobindo comes to the core issue. It's not about the perpetuation of the body and the mind. It's about the soul's evolution. So what is the point of this perpetuation if the soul's evolution is blocked by this perpetuation? So the only way this perpetuation would be meaningful is if it could accommodate the soul's evolution while still being the same. If that be the case, then it could be permitted and it would not be a hindrance. So is this possible, and what are the conditions for this? So we read this now. But this aspiration could only succeed if the mind, life or body could put on something of the immortality and divinity of the indwelling spirit. So if these instruments took the character of the indwelling spirit, then you might have something. What does that mean though? There are certain circumstances in which the survival of the outer mental personality, representative of the inner mental Purusha, could be possible. So outer mental personality is representative of the inner mental Purusha. It's not that. It's still a partial developed influence, not fully organized. Recall our discussion last time where this whole thing has been discussed in great detail, in great depth. So he says in certain circumstances, the survival of the outer mental personality could be possible as representative of the inner mental Purusha. What would be the circumstance? It could happen if our mental being came to be so powerfully individualized on the surface and so much one with the inner mind and inner mental Purusha, and at the same time so open plastically to the progressive action of the infinite, that the soul no longer needed to dissolve the old form of mind and create a new one in order to progress. So that's your key. If the mind could fulfill the requirement of the soul to be able to have new personalities and yet retain its individuality, then this can happen. So what are the three things required? First, The mental being has to become so powerfully individualized on the surface. Then you can say, I, this person, mind person, am continuing into the next incarnation. Otherwise, if it's not individualized here, the substance is taken, reformed into a new mental personality. It's no more I, it's a new personality. You want the same personality, you want to say, I'm incarnating. So for that, you must have the individualization of the mind that can hold the sense of I, free from the body, even, on its own strength, with the support of the soul, as representative of the true mental Purusha. In most human beings, this is not done. Or if it is done, it is a hard, rigid. So still individualization. The second requirement is, it must be so much one with the inner mind and the inner mental Purusha. So who is it representing? The thing that it is representing, it should now literally join with in some way. Feel itself as a continuum from there. So that the thing it is representing can infuse and shape it freely into the next format required or the next line of experience that it needs. Still individualized, connected with this, there's a third requirement, which is the most critical. Because you want to be able to have new experiences. You want to be able to have the new personality. So, and at the same time, so open plastically to the progressive action of the infinite. This plasticity now. There is an infinite, capital I, working on this individual. Look at the whole universe as one divine infinite being consciousness, which is your playground, but which is also the domain which is acting on you. You are this point. Everything is this infinite, conscious divine being. And it is working on you progressively to shape you, mold you, help you grow, shaping your mind. Progressively, as you grow, if you resist, where you resist and it cannot shape you, either you break, or eventually it says, okay, I need to break the whole mold and take the essence of this with new material. So if now this mind, so individualized and so united with the inner mind and the inner mental Purusha, accepts to become so plastic and open in plasticity, it's not enough to be plastic. You must then accept to be shaped. You must have the opening. It's not enough to be open. You must be also able to be plastic, because when it shapes you, it wants to shape you so differently. You can't say, hey, if you change me too much, I will lose myself. You have to be plastic and open, the two conditions. To what? To the progressive action of the infinite. And infinite means infinite potential. So you must be willing to be in that infinite potential shaping you. That the soul no longer needed to dissolve the old form of mind and create a new one in order to progress. Remember, soul's progress is primary. If the mind can fulfill these three conditions, soul says, I don't need to dissolve it. I can continue with the same substance and with the same mind. Individualized, but plastic. And at that point, you will literally have the ability to, taking on a new incarnation, say, I'm conscious that I was such and such. That such and such incarnation, I had expressed these qualities. Here I express completely different qualities and shape myself. Carrying the essence of that, I'm still the same, but new in expression. In such a case, and this is the important keyword, soul no longer needed to dissolve. The compulsion to dissolve is now overpassed. It may still choose to dissolve for whatever reason, because it's free. But the compulsion is overpassed, and the soul can say, all right, I can as well keep it. And if that be the soul's purpose then to keep it, then you would have this continuity retained. But it must fulfill these three conditions. Now that's not enough. If you want everything to carry, all the other parts have to have similar plasticity, right? So a similar individualization, integration, and openness of the vital being on the surface would alone make possible a similar survival of the life part in us. The outer vital personality representative of the inner life being the vital Purusha. So just as with mind, with the inner mind and the inner mind Purusha, mental Purusha, so too the vital has to first be strongly individualized and then aligned and joined to integrated with the inner vital Purusha and the inner life being, and open to being plastically shaped by the influence of the infinite. So that's regarding the vital. What would really happen then is that the wall between the inner self and the outer man would have broken down, and the permanent mental and vital being from within and the mental and vital representatives of the immortal psychic entity would govern the life. So if you see what he has just described, is that this gap between the inner and the outer has now been bridged because both are strongly connected to the inner, and the mental and vital representatives of the immortal psychic being, psychic entity would govern the life. What does that mean? What is the mental vital representative of the psychic entity? Remember, the psychic being across lives has developed through accumulation of experiences a certain personality, and the mental part of that personality would govern the life. The vital part of that personality would govern the life. So it's really the psychic personality now coming forward and infusing itself into this individualized mind vital, which has been bridged with the inner mind and inner vital and is open plastically to the shaping of influence of the infinite. Our mind nature and our life nature could then be a continuous progressive expression of the soul and not a nexus of successive formations preserved only in their essence. So right now you have these focal points of formations, keeping only the essence of each. Instead, you could have the mind life nature as a continuous progressive expression of the soul. But it is still the soul expressing itself through these things, and according to the need of the soul, these things are shaped while still being individualized. Our mental personality and life personality would then subsist without dissolution from birth to birth. Because it's an expression of the soul, you could go on and continue with the same personality across lives. No need to dissolve. They would be, in this sense, immortal, persistently surviving, continuous in their sense of identity. And you could still say, I'm the same person. I'll give an analogy. All of you who have lived long enough and have been through certain transitions and sometimes radical shifts in consciousness or in growth, when we look back at life, we say, when I was a child, I was like that, but I'm not the same person. I have grown, I've changed so much. You can't hold that against me because I'm not the same person. You can punish that fellow, you can't punish me because I'm not the same person. Isn't it? So at least we can all recognize, let's say what you were in kindergarten and what you are now. I'm not the same person. And yet I am the same person. You have the continuity saying, I was that, but as personality and as the person that is being expressed, I'm not the same. But in life as an adult, you often go through major transitions and shifts. Sometimes they're radical enough that you can look back and say, that's a different life, it's not the same. I have changed. And yet I'm the same person. It's something like this. I'm going to put it in slightly different words if you catch the sense of what this is, without having acquired this continuity which he is describing here. A very reduced sense of that is seen in this kind of shift. Okay? So in this kind of shift, I would say it's literally as if that person died and this person has now taken over, is newborn. And my suggestion would be for all of us to consciously work upon our lives at such a pace of growth and change by putting all this in practice, strong individualization, turning the outer to the inner and trying to live by the values of the inner, allowing the inner to infuse into the outer more and more, reshaping yourself in terms of the inner. And third, allowing yourself to be shaped freely, being plastic to what you have to learn and grow to be. Even if it's not brought to the degree that he's speaking of, where literally you continue across lives. If you do a little bit of this now in this life, you will realize that the shifts are radical enough that you look back and say, what I was 10 years ago, I'm not today. Or what I was 5 years ago, I'm not today. And in that sense, I'm going to suggest you must have multiple rebirths within this single lifetime. go through such radical transitions every whatever number of years that you will be able to look back and say, I'm not the same person, I'm a new person. This would be worthwhile. This would literally be the equivalent of taking multiple births in different ways. Maybe not to that degree, but still within the broad framework of this life personality, the shifts are radical enough. So what we have read through, the three conditions required, are not only useful in the long run for the continuity of life, continuity of consciousness across lives, but within this life as a practice, you can have multiple, so to say, rebirths in a minor way and grow rapidly in your evolution. And of this, if you can reach this in the continuous sense of identity across lives, Sri Aurobindo says, this would be evidently an immense victory of soul and mind and life over the inconscience and the limitations of material nature. So mind and life has survived material nature, body is being dropped, can't help it, that's still too rigid. That's being shed, but you, person inhabiting with mind, life, surface person included, are continuing despite body change. There's one more thing. But such a survival could only persist in the subtle body. The being would still have to discard the physical form. Biology is unable to. Pass to other worlds and in its return put on a new body. So all the things we have discussed about reincarnation, they're still valid. But now you as a person are able to reincarnate. The awakened mental Purusha and vital Purusha, preserving the mind sheath and life sheath of the subtle body, which are usually discarded, would return with them into a new birth and keep a vivid and sustained sense of a permanent being of mind and life, constituted by the past and continuing into the present and future. But the basis of physical existence, the material body, could not be preserved even by this change. So now the question comes, well, what can you do? Can you make the physical self survive? And so he touches upon this. The physical being could only endure if by some means its physical causes of decay and disruption could be overcome. And at the same time, it could be made so plastic and progressive in its structure and its functioning that it would answer to each change demanded of it by the progress of the inner person. So, what this means? Actually, Sri Aurobindo quickly closes this question, taking it to logical conclusions. But what this means is so important. Because especially in the context of the integral yoga, where you want to manifest in the physical consciousness, all the highest, and the physical body itself must learn to experience the divinity in substance of consciousness. For such a transformation being the goal, this becomes extremely important. If by some means the physical causes of decay and disruption could be overcome, and at the same time the body made so plastic. So this is a theme in itself so important that I'm going to reserve it for the next session, and that will be the closing of our topic. But after that we will take up, many of you have been asking also, the topic, the theme of current affairs. But this is so important, the physical immortality of and what would it imply. And I want to address this from multiple directions, including what Sri Aurobindo discusses here, what it implies and relates to in his last writings of the physical transformation itself, and how it relates to the biology knowledge that we have today and the technical knowledge, as well as what was mentioned earlier about the occult and the magical, alchemic and magical methods. What those things suggest and how they relate to this process and this transition. It's a very important topic, and I think it's important enough that we will treat it separately. So coming now back to, in summary, to what we have just read about the mind and the vital being made to be persistent enough. Remember the three things: strong individualization, integration from the outer to the inner, because the inner is what is being expressed in the outer. As long as the outer is cut off in its expression and a reduction of the inner and not responsive to the inner, well, it has to be discarded. If the outer now opens and integrates and joins and becomes an expression of the inner and allows the inner to shape it and actively lives the purpose of the inner. Then you have the continuity and the purpose retained. And then becoming plastic. Plastic to the evolutionary pressure of the infinite working in you. So these three conditions. Think of how in your life the circumstances have assisted you in this or not. Think of what you have done to actively participate in such a way, such an effort or not. And what can you do to actively promote these three things? If such be your interest, if such be your priority. And I think for all of us, it is essential to work in this direction, because the work you have done in this lifetime is not worth being lost. You should not have to start afresh all over again with no memory and say, I don't know what I am here for, and then spend another 20 or 30 years to find your sense of purpose, and then maybe undo the efforts of last bad, defective education which externalizes you, and all the rest of the drama which has brought us to where we are today with all the effort. We should be able to continue exactly where we have left off with conscious memory, saying, this is where I am, and I'm going to continue without losing anything of the work done. This is worth the trouble. Putting it another way, let's say you are, 80 years old now. And at 80, I've got all this. If at this point I had a new lease of life, I'm newborn with full continuity of consciousness, how much more I would be able to do. That is worth it. And that's what it will be effectively if you worked on this. So I'm going to pause here with this part of the discussion for today and look at a few questions which have come and a few comments, and I want to share because some of these are very important. There are a few comments from people, several people, speaking of how it was very useful to have heard last time's session multiple times. So Maya writes, I had to listen 3 times before I could hold all the precious information. Bhaira Kala writes that excellent lecture. I approached these as something that doesn't interest me much except in parts. Then as I listen to them, I see practice, not just theory or philosophy. It expands practical knowledge and possibility of applying it. And then he says, and you need to carefully look at them several times so that everything as much as possible for someone is understood and applied. And I really appreciate that he recognizes this also. And then Freni says, there's so much to know and understand with clarity how it all is worked out by the divine. Listening once is not enough. We'll be listening again. And Vijis has a question. Oh, I'll have to take that separately. So this idea I want to highlight, because for those of you who found it useful, particularly the last time, and maybe some of these times also, when you read Sri Aurobindo, the content is so concentrated. And when you unpack that concentration, there's so many different aspects, so many different elements, and it's so richly interwoven that for the normal working of the human mind, which catches one piece at a time, it's not enough. So what happens is, in the first reading, or in this case, hearing of the elaboration, you look at the whole thing from a certain angle of consciousness, which you were in. But the experience now of this shifts your center. You are now made to look at things differently. There's an overturning of perspectives, even widening of perspective. When you hear it a second time and you reread a second time, from this new perspective, you understand much more deeply and richly, which allows a deeper integration. And then a third time when you do, then you get a much more complete, and it touches you and, so to say, is absorbed in a way that perhaps you could even turn it into practice. So it's a suggestion. And based on those comments, I'm going to encourage those of you who would like to do that. And there's a point to the 3. The first is a radical shift. The second one is a preparatory integration process that begins. And the third one, which allows the real assimilation, typically. That's how it works. There are a few questions. One is from Revati. She says, is the ultimate goal of reincarnation uniting with the divine? What exactly does this mean? If I have interpreted correctly, I read in one of Mark's books that he actually became aware and could sense that a soul was uniting with the divine. That amazed me. The mother has said that when a psychic being is completely formed, it can either rest in the psychic world or can choose to reincarnate again and begin another life of development. And I read in Dinar Miriam's book when she recollects that in one of her incarnations she had this wonderful opportunity to be with Sita Maya. Maya means mother, so Sita mother. I too feel a very deep connection with the aspect of the divine mother, with that aspect of the divine mother, but can recollect nothing. Would it be wise to pursue such memories, which I am also not capable of doing at this stage? Wouldn't it be beautiful to at least be able to recollect memories of past lives, where one has had contact with the divine? What should be the approach? Please shed some clarity on these aspects. So now, based on what we have read, much of this would be quite obvious. And so I'm going to draw upon what we have read in the answers. The goal of reincarnation, uniting with the divine, yes, but it's not just merely merging, as many of the more ascetic traditions do. Abandon everything, merge and unite with the divine, the rest is discarded. It's not that. It is, yes, it is uniting with the divine in consciousness, but as an efflorescence, a manifestation of the divinity that you are uniting with, so that that divinity now flows through you and expresses itself through you in its fullness of infinite possibilities, in the particular way that is your line of expression. Then yes, it is true. So yes, the soul uniting with the divine, when there is this contact and when it is a sharp joining, it sets off a ripple which can be felt. And with, let's say, increasing degrees of that immersion with the divine consciousness, you have a choice, either as a withdrawal from the world or as a vehicle for the divine will to act through you and work through you. That makes a big difference. And so with that correction, yes, uniting is one of the aspects, but it's the basis for manifesting. And then the question about past life recollections. So because Revati says that she does not recollect but feels a deep connection with this aspect of the Divine Mother as Sita, what to do about it? Can the memory be pursued? If so, how? Yes, one could. We have discussed the methods of pursuing that memory. Since you feel that deep connect, one of the methods you would do is first of all go deep within in this way to this point where you're in the inner concentration, completely disconnected with the surface, and from there feel that thing where you feel the familiarity, the closeness, which is like a memory. Concentrating in this, on this, you go deeper into it until as if you join with it and allow it to reveal whatever comes. If nothing else, you may not always get images or memories or specific details. It's not important, remember, based on the discussion. What you will get is the quality of experience of that immersion or that closeness. And at the level of the essence which is carried by the soul, that is precious. And that you can get. So it's not such a big deal. You already have it, you're feeling it in this sense of close familiarity. Now you'll dwell in it. Whether specific memory comes or not, it actually doesn't matter. What if, just for argument's sake, you were shown a picture, a vision. So I see a picture now, I see, in this case, this aspect, Sita, Mother Sita, Sita Maya. You see something from a certain viewpoint of somebody who was there. You see the pictures of it like you watch a movie. You're in a cinema hall, you're watching a movie. Of course, watching that evokes in you certain reactions and responses, which come from within you, but they're not coming to you from the movie. What is the value of that? Except as a way of evoking what you experienced. So what is the value is what you experienced in the evocation, right? Suppose you went into a past life memory as a picture only. What it evoked today, if it was valuable, that would be useful. But otherwise the picture is quite unnecessary, even I would say useless. What you're trying to get is not the picture, but the experience of the immersion and that closeness. That is precious, so catch that in any case, and that is within your reach. If pictures come, fine. If they don't, it doesn't matter. Catch this, which the soul has kept as the essential part of that experience, and let that come forward in its rightful place in the current work of the life. So, is it wise to pursue such memories? In this way, it would be helpful if you're so drawn And you are capable of doing it in this way. So wouldn't it be so beautiful to recollect memories of past lives where one has had contact with the divine? Yes, it could be, but it could be in a very narrow aspect. And it might just trigger you to attach to that one aspect and then be unable to open to the fullness of the experience that is now being given, that is now being prepared for in this life, which is more than that aspect. So again, I will point to the essence of that experience being valuable, not the form of it. Let's say you were an ascetic in a prior life. In that ascetic mode, you had a particular experience. And in that experience, you said, oh, now that I have found this divine presence, I have no interest in the world and I renounce everything. Let's say that happened. If that came forward, you would again want to renounce in the same way or attach to that particular aspect. Whereas the essence that the soul has carried is the memory of that familiarity with the closeness. That is precious. But now with that memory of that familiarity, as the thing grows, it opens to the fullness of what must now be a more complete and perhaps life-embracing experience of divinity. In this way, it would be useful. And it is the reason why the details are held back. So think about this. Yes, it has value, but the details of form are secondary and might even distract. I will give a couple of examples. There's one person in the ashram who had come, Dilip Kumar Roy, who had, for whatever reason, perhaps from past connection that he had with Sri Krishna in that incarnation, in this life was a devotee of Sri Krishna, Bhakta, and he would sing songs in praise of Sri Krishna, have beautiful experiences, all were given by Sri Aurobindo. But any experience Sri Aurobindo gave, he would translate and fit into the box of his particular relation that he had with that deity and form of Sri Krishna. So there's a correspondence of Nirodbaran with Sri Aurobindo saying, well, why don't you, Guru, he would address Sri Aurobindo as Guru, why don't you reveal yourself to him? And Sri Aurobindo says something like this. He says, each time I do that, he only chants more the name of Krishna. He could not see beyond that particular, we call it Ishta Devata, meaning the beloved form of deity. But the beloved form of deity, your narrow personality attached to that narrowness of that form and did not allow the new movement of opening to the fullness of the divinity beyond that particular form. So be very careful even about this idea of Ishta Devata, because it comes from many of the traditions. Oh, you must seize upon this one thing and pursue only that. No, that's not the way. That's your gateway. Through that, you have to open to the fullness of the divine. Even sometimes, and I'm going to share this as a personal experience again, when I conceive of the Divine Mother, certainly this form of Divine Mother that we have as incarnation of the Mother, it's a gateway. But if I stop with this body form with 2 hands and 2 legs, who wore a particular dress when she played tennis, it's good, it's useful. It allows a certain personal intimacy. But it stops me and limits me to that. Because now she has to come with that form, or if she is busy here, she cannot be there, and so on. The reality is she is the physical inhabitation of the cosmic Divine Mother who is at once transcendent, immanent, and individual. Can I get to that experience of her? If I can, that is useful. And then know her in her individual aspect in this. But even as I look at this individual aspect, I will not stop with the form. I will break through to the fullness of what she is. And in that sense, it becomes Ishta Devata. The gateway is in this quality of relation that I have through this form, but opens out to the fullness, then it is useful. If you reduce it to the form, you are preventing what she herself reveals herself to be, which is in this cosmic. And that's when you can feel her right here, right now, embracing you in the very air that you breathe, embracing you through your life circumstances, living within you, and yet at the same time transcending space and time. That's when you really know her. Can you get to this experience using this as your entry point, or even at some point, if necessary, be willing to discard the limitation that the form brings and know her in pure consciousness that incarnated in the form, and through that pure consciousness open out to her fullness the way she knows herself and wishes to reveal herself to you in her fullness. So many stories come in the ascetic traditions. So and so did puja, and Shiva appeared before him and granted him a boon. What was the appearance of Shiva? Well, you have this traditional form. Is that what Shiva is? No, he is a cosmic being. And certainly he appears in this traditional form in certain ways, in certain domains, in certain vital world reflections, or as partial individualized incarnations in the vital worlds, etc. But is that it? No, he is something far more. And can you know him in his fullness, necessarily therefore free of that particular form? That would be worthwhile as an experience. Then what will happen is when you meet that form, you will feel the consciousness behind, which is this massive infinite. And the form is just a focal point of contact. So such should be the general approach, and that's why recollecting the past life memories where you might have had a partial glimpse might not be helpful, but recollecting the essence of that experience would be of great help. So I hope that helps you in your pursuit. Rajan has asked another question, which is from, again, the last time's discussion. You read from the Life Divine, he quotes Sri Aurobindo, such a complexity and gathering up of many personalities in one person can be a sign of a very advanced stage of the individual's evolution. When there is a strong central being that holds all together and works towards harmonization and integration of the whole many-sided movement of the nature. We read that, we had an elaboration on it last time. So Rajan's question, could you provide some examples of people who exemplified this apart from Sri Aurobindo himself? For instance, Leonardo da Vinci's name sometimes comes up when reading literature related to the ashram. We know about the many-sided movement in him, but was there a strong central being? What about your teacher's first teacher, Kapali Shastriya, the versatile genius? Would he be an example of the above quote, perhaps Panditji himself? As a different current example, what about Elon Musk? Would it be correct to say that there is a many-sided movement, but not necessarily harmonized because perhaps because a strong central being is missing? So that's his question. So yes, Leonardo da Vinci is a brilliant example. You see the extraordinary diversity and mastery in each field. There was definitely a strong central being. Without that, you cannot hold in a single person this multiplicity and even the blending across specialized fields of this kind of mastery. And the central being, strong central being, was obviously present. That is very, very much. Without that, what would happen is these disparate facets would tend to pop up or not in a haphazard way. When you see them cohesively working, even as you switch between modes, still they are cohesively held. That is a strong central being. Yes, Kapali Shastriya had that, and we can see in his writings, in the brilliance of his thought, for those of you who have read him, or at least have an idea of what he was able to express. He's a good example of this. Panditji himself was a good example. Kapali Shastriya demonstrated him as a good example in various respects also. So yes, these people have that ability. What you see is certain facets. It does not mean these are all the facets. There could be more which have not been brought forward in this particular incarnation. But again, that's not a sign enough. You don't have to be a genius and having mastery in multiple facets. The multiple facets can come in other ways. So I'm going to give an example of this. Let's say the questioner himself, Rajan, I will ask you to look into yourself and see, very likely, you have a part in you that is a very musical part, that you enjoy certain styles of music. And when you get immersed in it, it's as if you are a connoisseur, perhaps. Observe that part in you which so thoroughly enjoys it. And then you see in that part, you ask yourself, could I have been a musician? And you'll say, maybe in a different circumstance, I could have been. I'm saying this specifically in the context of Rajan, but it could apply to many of us. Maybe if my life had taken a different turn. Maybe if this other aspect was not so strong. If my turn to, let's say, computers was not so strong, I would have been a musician. Or I might have been a good connoisseur of music, not playing actively or singing actively. So when you see something like that, you say, yes, this comes from something built in the past life. But in this life, it's not been taken to its full potential. Perhaps that's the maximum potential of the past life, but more likely it's even a partial aspect of what was developed in a past life, because it's not necessary for the primary purpose in this life. So you may have, here's one facet, turn to something else, and something else, and something else, and you might find in you various aspects. You might feel, for example, oh, I have this heroic side. Given a certain challenge in life where there's a great danger, I can go out and literally fight and die for a great cause. Where does this come from? I don't actively use it, or it's partially used in my intellectual work. You notice this, but it's a strong thing. Well, that's another aspect, but it's hardly expressed, or you have hardly an opportunity to express it. Observe in this way, and you'll find, perhaps in your case, 3 or 4 or more. And some may find even more. But not all equally developed, not all of them at an exceptional level, but they're distinct in their characteristic, in their facet, in their turn, in the impulse that they bring into the overall personality of your current temperament. That's your reference. So again, you don't need to look for genius. You look for these things. So I take the example of my teacher, MP Pandit, because I saw him very closely, and those of us who knew him, it's so obvious that he was a king. He was even an emperor. And obviously this is from a past life. But in this life, he never, of course, took a position which was equivalent of political authority. He did have administrative responsibility, which he wielded with the same power and force, but in a very different limited context, which was the context of the ashram. And when he had to give it up, he royally gave it up just like that and literally walked away at some point, because certain situations had been placed upon him as if to divest him of those powers. He gave it royally, with no looking back and without hesitation. Even at some point, the mother asked him to hand over certain positions that he had, certain responsibility, to a specific person who was utterly incompetent. That's why I will not name what that was. But mother wanted him somehow involved in the administration of the ashram because she saw a certain thing there. And Panditji handed over completely, thoroughly, and just trained him and then disconnected fully with no remorse. And mother observed to him and told him, oh, I'm so happy that you were able to give it up without any reaction or resistance. That itself is a capacity which is developed in the past, you see. So things like this you see and you realize how rich and complex it can be. It's not always obvious as separate pieces of dramatic mastery or genius, because it's been blended, it's been integrated, isn't it? So now coming to the example of Elon Musk, yes, you see in him many facets. But you're asking, is it not necessarily harmonized from lack of strong central being? No, that's not a correct thing. Not a correct conclusion. There is a strong central being. What you see is a certain disconnection in the way he expresses himself for 2 reasons. First, the vital is very strong. And a strong vital is difficult to master even for the strong inner being. With the strong central being, still the vital has tendencies to overdo, tendencies for excess. And sometimes it can be even reactive. But within that framework, you still see a continuity and integration with the overall sense of purpose, which is never compromised. That comes from a strong central being. The second issue he has is also that the intelligence is very highly developed, the vital is very powerful, and there is an extraordinary skill also to manage things in a certain way. But these two have not been sufficiently integrated, despite there being a strong central being. The result is, when he has to answer a question, he has to pause, step back, articulate what he wants to express, formulate it, and then move forward to expression. The lack of sufficient integration requires him to go through such a process. But this is common to all of us in some degree, especially if you have depth of either force or knowledge. The moment you're challenged, if you blurt out, you often find what you express is not complete enough. You have to take a step back, find the fullness of what is deeper, and then flow to express. And he does that consciously. The fact that he does that shows again a strong central influence. There's another example of Steve Jobs, and I've read this, I've not seen the video. I'm told the video is available online. It happened sometimes in the late 80s or early 90s, when he had just got into Apple in a big way. And in one of the meetings, someone from the audience asked him a very provocative question, which was challenging and intended to provoke him. And in the video we see Steve Jobs wants to reply, he holds back. Then he sits down, slowly takes a cup of water and waits and waits and waits. It took him nearly 3 or 4 minutes. And then after that he gives his reply. Again, it shows a very powerful control in the center of the person, which is able to restrain, hold back, take a position. In this case, perhaps he needed to calm himself, find the depth of clarity, and free of the distress of emotions, then be able to articulate. And the fact that he has that control again shows past life of a yogi, where certain of these capacities had been developed and mastered, now integrated into the new personality. Steve Jobs, as you know, has had a very strong monastic tendency even in his life. He lived very simply, monastically. He had a very deep spiritual side also, again turned largely to a kind of a monastic outcome. But the creativity which he brought, etc., were from other different lives all woven into this one. And I'll just take one last question, which is from Apurva. It's a long question. Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for this profound series. The enriching experience to dwell upon Sri Aurobindo's words has definitely opened new doors for me on the journey. I try to keep the practices you've suggested as my primary preoccupations throughout the day. I would like to share an experience along those lines. I do not like to learn by heart anything which I am studying. While I am studying, I usually read and understand and meditate and draw upon it. This method is not useful in all subjects except analytic ones. But I tried to extend it. I read Sri Aurobindo's words, tried to stay in that experience, and then move on to study, as in to memorize. I experimented by doing this for concepts the least number of times so that I am not learning by heart, so to speak. The same I could not recall in my normal consciousness. Now what he or she is describing is extremely interesting. Just watch carefully. Having learned something while in deep concentration in Sri Aurobindo study. The same I could not recall in my normal consciousness. Then I tried to quieten the mind and draw from the inside. Instantly I could recall. The interesting part being, I was back in that meditative state while reading Sri Aurobindo when the recalling happened. And it is effortless. Sometimes I feel my subtle physical being also, large, tall, free, and more deep. The idea suggested in the Auroville talks. Thank you so much for making all these experiences accessible. Please continue doing what you do. So I want to comment on this because it's very interesting, and I would like more of you to notice when such a thing happens. So in the description, Apurva says, while immersed in this concentration, something is read, reread, and it's as if absorbed and is by heart. You come out of that state, you don't have the memory of what you have received or learned by heart. You get back into that state, you have it. Or while you are out of it, if you recall, then you get pulled into this state. Interesting. Observe this, and it's a very clear sign that the inner layer in which this is being done and the outer layer on which, let's say, you fall into in your normal life, the two are separate with a gap in between. That gap may be very fine in this case, as it seems, but still there's a gap. The result is, as you come into the normal surface consciousness, the memory of this fades. You go back to the memory in the inner, the memory is vividly clear, or trying to recall from outside pulls you into that state where the memory is held. So two implications. First, that the memory on the surface and the memory on the inner or other layers are very different. And the same thing is true between lower and higher grades of consciousness also, where memory is different. Between outer and inner layers, memory is different. Each part of consciousness has its own memory. The second implication is these memories, which are all different finally, seem to be one seamless whole only when those layers of consciousness are integrated. And when they are not seamlessly felt, as in this case, it indicates a gap. Now, what I would suggest for you to do is shift consciously between these two states. Put yourself into the state where you don't have the memory. You'll feel your inner outer state. Shift back into the inner and you find the memory. Shift back to the outer. Go back and forth between this, and then try to maintain or extend the memory into the outer. Or in the outer, retain the memory as if it's a part of you in a deeper layer which is being drawn out. When you do this a few times, that gap which is there gets bridged. Look up also a prior discussion we had in the series numbers from after 90, where I think I've used the title of Bridges, creating bridges, or something like that, where this whole thing has been discussed in detail. But just play with this and you'll find the integration takes place very quickly. And then at some point, having done this, you'll find the gap is no more there, and what is held in the inner can actually flow into the outer more easily, including, of course, the memory also. There's something more interesting even. In the description here, Apurva says, I feel my subtle physical also, large, tall, free, and more deep. Again, this is very valuable experience because you notice that that is much more truly you. Large, tall, free, more deep is not just of course, it's in the subtle physical that you're experiencing it, but what you're experiencing is part of your inner range of consciousness. And it is the beginning of this domain which is, Sri Aurobindo has described as the inner mind, inner vital, or the subliminal generally. The thing which we have to bridge for the continuity of the life consciousness across lives. Observe this. So obviously when you shift in the consciousness of the subtle physical, there the access to the inner consciousness is more easy. So you're experiencing subtle physical as substance, but from there the consciousness which you're experiencing is much more and much deeper and includes something of the inner vital and inner mental. It's the domain of the subliminal beginning. It's just on the entry point of that. Hold that poise. Feel as if you will feel at that point as if there's much more waiting within you. You feel intuitively, hold that. Turn into that, lean back into that, rest in it, allow it, so to say, to flow and fill you or come forward. You're building bridges, you're building continuity, you're developing consciousness now which goes deeper, into deeper ranges and qualities. Observe very likely when you're doing this, you are at a particular grade of consciousness in the mental or some part of the physical mind or something in that range. But you can shift levels also and experience this on other levels. Into the vital, into the physical, purely. And that would deepen the equivalent experience here onto other levels, corresponding to what we discussed earlier today about the inner mind, inner vital, and in this case also something of the inner physical. So here's an entry point of a first experience. Work on this and you'll find so much more directly accessible to you more and more. And this would be the method of the integral yoga, to directly move into these experiences. For those of you who might wonder what is this experience of the subtle physical being, I would suggest for you to look at or to put in practice the video which I have put up on the same YouTube channel, which is called Guided Meditation for Descent of Peace. That's the title given there. In that you go through this process of the descent, and then from there you become aware of the presence felt in you and also in the subtle physical. It's an entry point to become conscious of that layer, and from there a lot of other things become easy. So I found this very interesting, and I wanted to share this with many of you might have had similar experiences, and it helps to know that what you can do with it to build upon it. So these were some of the questions and comments which came, which now, based on what we read today, we can easily answer and will have satisfying answers. So with this, I would like to close today's session. Review what we have gone through. Recall the three things which are required for continuity of consciousness. Individualization, using Sri Aurobindo's words. A similar individualization, integration, and openness to the action of the infinite. So these are the three keywords he uses: individualization, integration, and openness or flexibility to that influence. But I will reread the lines as he has described it for the mind. So first of all, mind, life, body have to become representatives of the inner. They have to put on something of the immortality and divinity of the indwelling spirit. In other words, they have to reshape themselves in the mold of that influence, which means that influence should be within you. So that's certainly a general part of the work to be done. So, and this could happen, survival of the outer mental personality could happen if our mental being came to be so powerfully individualized on the surface. First. Second, and so much one with the inner mind and inner mental Purusha. So the individualization should not be cut off from the inner. It should then become a vehicle to unite with the inner and become an expression of that, a vehicle for the inner. And third, and at the same time so open plastically to the progressive action of the infinite that the soul no longer needed to dissolve the old form of mind. So, open plastically to the progressive action of the infinite. Now, it is very, again, subtle suggestion, and at the same time. Why does it say and at the same time? Because the individualization as we normally experience it tends to reduce and harden into rigidity. That's how we know individuality, isn't it? You're more individualized when you're more rigid and less flexible. That's how you hold your individuality. So that's why at the same time, it's almost as if a complementing opposite tendency, you must become plastic. And this is where you realize true individuality is not rigidity. It is organizing around a central focal point. And that organization need not cause rigidity. In fact, rigidity is only a first step in nature's method of forming the individuality by rigidifying, so that an organization is forced by rigidity. And then later break the rigidity and again rebuild and break and rebuild until it can become flexible enough and retain the organization without the rigidity. Once you understand this, you will be careful not to allow rigidity even as you organize. Or let me put it in a more simple way, and we can make that our base practice initially at least. Forget the distinction between mental, vital and physical. Every impulse within you, every thought, every emotion, every action, every tendency, every desire, every habit, every instinct, every part of your consciousness in everything you do, place in reference to the deepest focal point or center that you can at that moment access. It can be something in the mind, it can be something deeper, it can be a part within you in which something of the psychic influence reflects, or the part in you which has the higher aspiration or the connection or sense of closeness with the divine. Doesn't matter specifically what. Don't get too much into the theory, what is this, what is that. The part in you which is the deepest and highest and most in alignment to the divine influence in whatever way felt. This and those, put those in relation to this. How? Every time you have a thought, become conscious of this and feel the value of this thought. You want to express something, become conscious of what you want to express in relation to this and feel what is its value and what is the best way to express. Even if you have a strong desire or impulse of some kind, take a pause, feel this. Feel the alignment or not. And it doesn't mean everything is to be rejected, even if it's misaligned. In the alignment or misalignment, what's the right expression where the alignment is more complete and less disconnected? Go into something very simple. Do not go into perfection. First put in relation and then make that more and more true to whatever extent possible. And automatically, as a result of this very simple practice, you are organizing all this, which is your personality, without making distinctions or analysis, around a focal point. More true, relatively, at that moment, whatever it is. You're individualizing. You're also putting in relation to the inner. And because it's also in relation to the inner and you're allowing the outer to be remolded in terms of that, you're also making flexible. A very simple exercise in which all three are being put into practice simultaneously with no special analysis or distinction. You could simplify it a little further. I would not make it too simple, but simply say, put it in relation to what is your relationship with the mother, to what the mother's presence feels. Or you would ask yourself, if mother is watching me now, what would be the right thing I would do? I am not recommending this because with that come your concepts of guilt. Oh, if mother is there, I cannot do this, I cannot do that, I cannot enjoy myself. You have wrong ideas of what she wants. So I don't want to do that. I say, whatever is your highest, deepest part that you feel. Generally, that's the part which has a relationship with the Divine Mother. That's good enough. Don't go too much into mental analysis or preconceptions. Feel, connect, and what's the best way you can be more true to what is more true within you in the action, in the expression. That's all. It's a very simple exercise. It spans across different parts, different tendencies. Automatically builds the individuality around a deeper center, and so links with the inner, and makes flexible in expression of the inner, working to influence the outer. Think about it, observe, put in practice for short durations, and after a while you might just enjoy it so much more and more, it changes your life, you might extend more and more. But here's a simple form of practice that if you feel so called to, we can begin with. Let's take a moment to concentrate in aspiration in this. Namaste.